Hello and welcome to the 62nd Bi-Monthly Breastfeeding Coalition's webinar. I'm Kinkini Banerjee, the Senior Coalitions Manager at USBC, and I'm so glad to have you join us for this session. This series is jointly hosted by CDC's Division of Nutrition, Physical Activity and Obesity and by the USBC. The series referred to as the 2-2-2 are held on the second Tuesdays of even-numbered months from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern. And the purpose of this series is to bring together state, territorial, tribal, cultural breastfeeding coalitions to share best practices and news and to network and collaborate on issues of national significance. Coalition members and breastfeeding advocates from around the country can join us for these free webinars. Join the Coalition Learning Connection to get all our announcements. The topics and session details are posted a week or two before each session, and they are also posted on the Coalition Learning Connection. So if you're not already on if you haven't joined our CLC or our Coalition Learning Connection, it just takes a couple seconds to do it. You need a user account, and you can go to usbreastfeeding.org/coalitions-connect to join up. So we've streamlined our registration process, and for the last year, this series is set up so that you register once and you automatically are registered for each session in this series. So you should be able to get reminders for these, you get evaluations, and we know that you may not be able to attend every session live. So a few hours after each session, the video recording is posted. You can find the handouts and notes. So do please visit the archive section as well. You should get that link on your confirmation email, or just go to our website and go to the webinar page. That's www.usbreastfeeding.org/coalitions-webinar, and this is how you do it. So when you go to our website, you'll see the tabs across the top. Just click on the Coalition tab and then scroll down to the CDC-USBC bi-monthly webinars, and it'll take you to the page. So today's slides are available for you to download. All attendees are in listen-only mode. During this, we have a large number of participants for today's session, but we encourage you to submit your questions at any time during the webinar. So please type your questions into the question box on your webinar control panel, and I'll show you how to do that. So on the right of your screen, you should see a control panel. If you don't see it, it might be minimized, so just click on that orange tab with the arrow and it'll pop back out. Scroll down, and under the audio tab is the questions tab. Click on that blue tab, questions, and it'll open up a text box for you to type your question in. If you have any technical problems during this session, please send an email to coalitions@usbreastfeeding.org, and our staff will be able to help you. Today, we will also have a breakout session to continue our conversation and discussion post-webinar. So you should have got an announcement about it. There's a separate registration required to join this hour-long breakout discussion session. It promises to be a great space for you to come talk to other folks around the country, hear what's happening in the field. So you should see in your chat box a registration link to join that separate session that is after this. Well, and that brings me to today's session, Landscape of Donor Milk in the United States. The Surgeon General's call to action, Action 12, related to donor milk, states identify and address obstacles to greater availability of safe, banked human donor milk for fragile infants. And we know now there's so much evidence supporting the critical role of donated human milk in assisting infants with special needs, infants in NICUs who are unable to receive their own mother's milk to achieve the best possible outcome. So during this session, you will learn a brief history of the emergence of human milk banks, members of the Human Milk Banking Association of North America, HMBANA, and talk about the challenges to reducing the barriers to greater availability of banked human milk. So this presentation will also cover how the emerging landscape of milk distribution from various entities and how to address the Surgeon General's call to action. You will learn about the new AAP policy for greater availability of safe banked donor milk for fragile infants, and specifically hear about what are the barriers to equitable distribution of human milk. How do we address the various access methods to milk for families? Who are the different players in the conversation of distribution? And why is this a public health imperative that needs to be addressed globally? I'm delighted to introduce our speaker for today. Pauline is the Executive Director of the Mother's Milk Bank in San Jose, California. She's the past president of the Board of Directors for the Human Milk Banking Association of North America, and she also serves on the board of the United States Breastfeeding Committee. She's been a member of the HMBANA Executive Board for over 8 years, and previously and was the chairperson of the Strategy Committee and the member of the Guidelines Committee, the Research Committee, the Medications Advisory Group. Pauline just brings a wealth of knowledge, and for all of you who are in the realm of working on policies for donor milk, you must have heard Pauline speak. I've been to milk bank drives, donor milk drives in my local hospital, and it's always wonderful. It doesn't matter what part of the country you are in. You see Pauline at our at the different milk banks around the country. Her work has propelled the oldest operating milk bank in the U.S., which is the San Jose Mother's Milk Bank, to become one of the highest distributing nonprofit banks of donor human milk. She was instrumental in the development of the Portland, Oregon Mother's Milk Bank and the Montana Mother's Milk Bank. Through this position, she's been able to support research and studies on bereavement and donation of breast milk and microbiological studies of milk pasteurization and milk composition. So it's with great pleasure that I turn it over to Pauline Sakomoto.
Thank you, Kinkini. Happy Valentine's Day to everybody. My gosh, I really appreciate the fact that you're spending a special holiday with me for an hour anyway. This topic, obviously, what Kinkini told you, has been near and dear to my heart. I've been very busy working at this for a number of years. I can tell you that the reason why and how I got involved 10 years ago as a donor, actually, to the milk bank in San Jose, because I had a daughter who, as an infant, and I shouldn't say this out loud, but she really looked like a sumo wrestler, and knew I had exceptionally large amounts of milk and was able to donate it. So from the perspective of what I know about milk banking, I see it from a donor's perspective as well as listening and talking to our recipients. So let me advance the slide here, see if it works. No, it's not working. Let's see. Okay, so what I wanted to do really quickly today, and this discussion can go on for hours, but I want to get into a bit of the ethical discussion on the equity issue of human milk distribution. Now, as Kinkini told you, I am part of the Human Milk Banking Association of North America. This conversation today is not only about HMBANA, but the other potential sources where families can get milk, and how those different agencies relate to each other or not relate, and what does that do to equity in distribution of milk. So to start off, and I apologize for the briefness of these slides, I'm just going to whip through them. But basically, the history of milk banking really is directly related to the practice of wet nursing. And most of you already know about the codes of Hammurabi, and in the 1700s in Europe, studies showing the decrease in mortality and morbidity rates of infants who breastfeed. So milk banking and sharing of milk is not anything new to us. So what does that mean in North America? Well, actually in the U.S., the institution basically about and of milk banking started about 100 years ago. The story is started in Boston, actually, and two pediatricians, knowing of the greatness of human milk and the decrease of mortality and morbidity in infants who did not have mothers available. And so they developed this method of housing women across from the orphanage and basically taking their excess milk across the street to the orphanage and feeding the infants. And so we have over 100 years of essentially milk banking in this country. And with anything that has to do with human milk or any tissue, there's always been a concern of disease transmission and appropriate storage and handling of the tissue. And so we've had multiple different types of organizations throughout the years who have done this. I mean, we've had women who in the past in their kitchen would store milk in their freezers and send it out to the community. And we've had also what we would call early milk banks, and they were prolific in the U.S. Just before the 60s. And for example, in California, there were probably around 35 milk banks at one point. But again, they were affiliated with the public health departments or the hospitals or someone's home. So it was really not regulated. And then in the 1940s, just about the time that infant formulas became very aggressive in their marketing to women during the war, the first standards for milk banking was published in the United States by AAP. And then in the 1970s, I think it was very important to understand that the proliferation of neonatology in North America really fueled the need for more milk banks. And in essence, that work of neonatology is really demanding the growth of milk banks and the pressure to open more outlets, and essentially making HMBANA look at different models of milk distributions. So the main tenet is safety. HMBANA was really developed to talk about safety and the guidelines. What does it mean to have safe milk? And the second question is, who should get donor milk? You know, what is the priority? So we have been driving those answers since 1985. And this is a real quick to show you that HMBANA does have a logo, and it's quite huge. But each of the milk banks also have their own logos to tell you that we're pretty much independent, all the milk banks, but yet we follow the standardization of HMBANA and processing human milk. So the emerging growth trends for HMBANA, while my last presidency from 2014 to 16, the number of milk banks increased from 18 operating milk banks to 26. The largest, I think, the growth of milk banks is actually in the southern states. And again, we're looking at collaborations among food banks, blood banks, and hospitals to really address the need for human milk for families in their respective areas. Now, mothers in milk banks, you know, our concern is that mom's own gets used first. I mean, our specialty is to support the mom when her milk is insufficient or not available for her infant. Then we can provide pasteurized human donor milk. Now, the caveat under this is, one, we really support successful breastfeeding. We need moms to breastfeed their own child, and the HMBANA banks are all in it to make sure that the moms are successful. Second tenet is we cannot do what we do in providing donor milk if we don't have successful breastfeeding moms. So it's important that we do support the USBC and all of you, that we do our darndest to get the moms to be successful in their breastfeeding. At the same time, we are very dedicated to ensuring that every infant has or gets access to donor milk. And so the big issue for milk banking today is the health equity. We want to make sure that all infants have access to the milk. So there is some misconception about milk banks, that we are not growing, that we're insufficient at providing milk. And you can see this is just a brief graph of the growth of distribution. And I suspect for 2016 we're going to see it go up again. We are growing not only in the numbers of milk banks, and here they are, but also in the distribution from each of the milk banks are growing. Who do we serve? We serve many, many hospitals and families in the U.S. As you can see from the previous slide, we have 26 milk banks, but in every state we are able to supply donor milk. So if your state doesn't have a milk bank, there is a sister milk bank close to you that will supply milk to you. And in California, if you notice all the marks of the hospitals we serve, if your hospital, for example, in LA is not getting milk, to let you know that your competitors are getting milk. So I think it's really interesting right now. The dynamics of the need of milk is growing dramatically in the U.S. Again, you can see that HMBANA, the majority of the distribution goes to hospitals. We know, so to speak, the biggest bang for the buck is to provide that donor milk to the smallest infant, to the most vulnerable. We do have outpatient distribution of milk, and unfortunately it looks a lot less than inpatient, but I'll relay the information later in the slides to tell you why I think that's happening. So forgive me for this really cryptic slide, but it gives you a really brief indicators of what is out there today. On the nonprofit end, of course, you've got HMBANA, who's got a history since 1985. You also have, I should say, not informal, but groups in communities or on the internet. And they're all based on donation, that the mothers donate their milk to these organizations to provide it to infants or families or maybe even adults that require it or want it. On the other hand, we have for-profit entities that are fairly new. I would say the development has been in the last 10 years. And for the for-profits, they're manufacturing new products that are human milk-based for the micro-preemies in the NICU, or they are an entity that is using food processing techniques to assure safety of the human milk. And then again, you have selling of milk by individual mothers online. And I think the tenet of for-profit entity in the last 2 years is, in order to keep their supplies up, they have now turned to paying donors for their milk nationally and internationally to keep their supplies up. And the next slide, and I apologize, it's so bad. I want to give notice that Marion Rice and Jodine Chase were the ones who developed this, and thank you very much for allowing us. But I'm sorry for the bad print, but it gives, what I wanted you to get is a feeling and an idea how much this milk banking and milk collection and distribution has grown since when it was only just HMBANA, and that the usages of milk can vary from the NICU to healthy infants to just components of human milk being used. So I just wanted to give you an idea how quickly this market is growing. On the next slide, okay, so in 2015, the European Milk Banking Association and HMBANA wanted a joint statement to address the informed sharing. We, not only in the U.S., but also in Europe, are seeing a tremendous growth in the sharing of human milk beyond the milk banking industry globally. And so it was a large piece of work, but the basic tenet was that we are hopeful that the informed sharing group clearly provides consent and information that there is potential cause for concern about disease transmission or medication side effects when one is sharing milk. And so it's not particularly saying don't do it, but that if you choose to do it, that there are risks. And once that came out, it became very clear to both of us, both of the organizations, that we have to ramp up what we do and make sure that we have the volume available for the families. So in 2016, we met with the sharing groups and talked about the differences between the two entities, the HMBANA milk banks and the sharing groups. And essentially, I think one of the major issue that came out of it, and really concern, is that the populations that we serve are so different. That the HMBANA banks are clearly more into the low birth weight, preterm, micropreemies, whereas the sharing groups have a larger, older babies that they serve. Nothing is wrong with that. My feeling is, my personal opinion is, they're doing HMBANA a great favor in filling a void that HMBANA banks could not fill. I think that we can move forward ahead with them and continue to dialogue about safety. The next slide, please. Okay, so this is, the original slide was the surgeon's call to action and the strategies. And the first one is conduct a systematic review of the current evidence on the safety and efficacy of donor milk. I think the new AAP paper did a nice job about that. The second thing is establish an evidence-based clinical guidelines for the use of donor milk, and I think that is something that definitely we need to work on. And the last thing was to convene a study on federal regulations in support of donor milk banks. And I think personally that we need to start having the conversation with the multiple entities out there collecting human milk for their various products or their various constituencies, that we have to be assured that all infants are protected and are able to get milk. This is the PEDIATRICS position of 2016, the donor human milk for the high-risk infant. Very, very clearly delineates what we need to do where we are now, and it does actually coincide with the surgeon's call to action, which is great. I love this statement. This is by Dr. Noble, that says we can now envision a future where the overwhelming majority of high-risk preterm infants will receive the low-tech but very powerful intervention of an exclusive diet of mother's and or donor milk. And I love this picture. This is one of our NICU nurses on a floor in California who wears this t-shirt incessantly. But I think that it's impressive that we've gone this far in such a short period of time. So this is a picture by Kuroji. Thank you very much for this wonderful cartoon, because I think it really defines where we are now, that the existing public policy is emerging to really address the landscape. It is not just the HMBANA banks who's trying to grow and have as many milk banks as possible to supply for all babies in the U.S. or all infants and children that require it by a prescription, but there's also this really kind of conflicting attitude about how to collect milk and who should get the milk, and we need to get to that level maybe on a federal platform to discuss this. So these, I shouldn't say drawbacks, but these are kind of some ethical issues that we should really be talking about on this platform. That the informed sharing, and we discussed this with 2 individuals from a very organized group, that are we competing with HMBANA and their depots and informed sharing? In fact, that the informed sharers do not have to go through the screening which HMBANA has determined to be, with CDC and FDA support, on what is safety. And then also the question is, if there is unequal access, then what does that do for the ill infants that really should be a priority in the U.S. to get some milk versus healthy infants? Again, the question about safety, do we have any regulation available, or should we come up with regulation on what is safe in the informed sharing group? And also, are there or will there be a regulatory body to really elicit all the calls of concerns from families about milk that was shared with them? And the last issue was that it is very clear that women who used informed sharing groups, that it is not just one child, one mother, that it's multiple mothers, and what's the question about safety with that? So online selling, which is totally opposite from informed sharing, is actually mothers online selling raw milk. And Sarah Keim did just tremendous studies about the quality of the raw milk being sold. And again, you know, the question is, why are families buying milk in this fashion when there is concern about the safety of the milk? And again, who does it go to? The justice of it. Is it unequal access for ill or infants, or healthy infants? And again, the safety and screening that Dr. Keim really did a superb job on. And also regulatory bodies. Now, there are 3 states that really regulate human milk as a human tissue, but it is not consistent throughout the U.S. So we really need to have someone look and regulate, or actually just to really look at what is going on out there and what is being sold, and is there a place, or is there a number, or a group that will listen to some of the issues in regards to bad outcomes. And again, it's limited supply per mother, so multiple sources are needed. So in regards to ethical issues with HMBANA and for-profit entities, again, the same issues. I think one of the really interesting practice that happened in Detroit and in California we tried to address is a predatory practice of buying milk from women who are lactating. And the biggest issue that came out of California was we did not want to see women who are selling their milk and providing formula through the WIC program to their infants. That was very critical. That was a huge event that happened in Detroit, and we did not want that happening in California. Another issue is cost. And so the use of a lot of these manufactured goods is limited due to the cost of the service, well, the product, if you will. And so we know that there is hospitals who cannot use that or will not use that product or those products because of cost. I think the other thing that's concerning to HMBANA and really the landscape, there's a lot of confusion out there and misinformation about HMBANA and the for-profit entities that really causes concern, and we need to again address that issue. I think generally speaking, and this is a picture of one of our little cuties from California, but we have to go back to particularly to think about is human milk a tissue or is it a food? And if it is a human tissue, ethically in the U.S., we don't allow unregulated sales of human tissue. So if it were an organ or blood or any other human tissue, would this be acceptable? So where HMBANA's position has always been, it is a gift, that the milk is volunteered and is not a commodity. So the question is HMBANA Banks able to meet everyone's needs? There is a priority listing of milk because we know that we get the biggest bang out of the buck for the smallest infants, so to speak, in regards to health benefits. And so we really are looking at this priority listing, and all the milk banks under HMBANA follow it, as you could tell by the previous slide. So, you know, we want to provide the milk to the smallest first, but indeed the smallest become graduates of the NICU and may have some problems in the home. We want them to go home. So there is distribution to the outpatient. We are beginning to see trends. For example, mothers of who are mastectomies, we will try to provide milk to. I think one of the biggest issues is insurance coverages for the milk. In some areas, it's very spotty in the U.S. For example, in California, the Medicaid program will cover it. I know in Indiana and the other states there may be no coverage or minimum coverage, but yet in some states, for example in Texas, that one of the largest employers' insurance will cover milk but will not cover it in California. So there's a great divide on who we can supply milk to just sheerly on insurance coverage. And then there is this huge misconception that if you don't have a milk bank in your state or town, none of the babies in your area can get the milk, or you can't provide your milk to a HMBANA bank, and which in fact is absolutely false. I think every nonprofit milk bank in HMBANA has depots in various areas. And in fact, we go out to many, many cities throughout the year to elicit information about donors and to provide the opportunity for them to donate milk. And I think for HMBANA, our marketing practices are limited, and sometimes they're confusing because we have multiple milk banks, and we are changing that to assure the public that the milk banks that are under HMBANA will be designated HMBANA milk banks on their marketing brochures and websites and so forth. So basically the barriers to human milk, the cost reimbursement. we need to start thinking about and start moving the agenda about that human milk is a medical necessity, that it should be provided to babies who require it over their financial status. It is difficult right now, and we need to have that conversation on a national level. I think another concern is health professionals' knowledge and education. Many health professionals are unaware and or don't even know how to access donor milk. And we do need to bump it up. They need to know how to use donor milk. I think the AAP did a superb job with the evidence that we have now. We're beginning to see more and more of the older infants in the nurseries and the maternity wards that are getting milk in the larger hospitals. And we need to look at what is the evidence for that, and we just don't have that yet. Hopefully soon. And then I think there are two questions that are just burning in, that I think that needs to be answered. And one is, when is the standard of time that an infant, whatever the age, should be on donor milk, and what's the methodology to transition an infant onto other food sources other than human milk? That's one thing that we don't know yet, and that needs to be answered. And another is the who should get milk. So HMBANA does have that priority listing, but we want to be able to provide to those who really have a prescription and who really have a need, such as allergies and sensitivities to other food sources, gastric surgery. We're beginning to see more and more uses of it. And then the other question is about, particularly for the preterm infant, what is missing in donor human milk that needs to be an additional nutritional supplement when a baby is given donor milk. And I think the evidence is there that when you use donor milk, you do need to fortify it. But how is that going to really elicit growth, and to what extent, and what does it look like? What is the composition of that fortifier to get the optimal growth? And again, where are we going to find the donor milk? How do we access that? And I am sure that all the milk bank directors in HMBANA get that question every day from hospitals and doctors. And so we do need to provide that educational opportunities and to talk about the landscape. When is it okay to get the milk from a internet? What does that mean? And I think that the other thing is that depending on the state, we don't have equal support for breastfeeding and donor milk. And again, that is a platform that we really need to have that conversation so that we make sure that all these babies have access to it. One of the, this sounds really awkward, but this has been drama since 1974 for HMBANA, and that is the question, is human milk a food or a human tissue? And as you can tell by the various different entities that are coming on board on the landscape, we have not answered that yet. The U.S. government hasn't really answered it. The AAP did a great job in putting its its voice forward to say that it is a human tissue. So the legal issues exist on donor milk between the states who consider breast milk as a human tissue and national regulations on milk banking or milk manufacturing that it is a food. We do need to get more information and clarification on what is the appropriate on preparation, handling, and shipping from for families receiving human milk from new or non-standard processing. Families that receive milk should be thoroughly informed of the risks involved in getting human milk from the sources. Benefits from milk processing may, to check and see if their insurance coverage. We need to, one of the problems with being designated a food in the U.S. is the insurance companies will not cover human milk. And so we clearly need to make a universal statement that it is for medical necessity. And the last thing was that we constantly need to request authorization for each and every infant. And again, that brings to point that if we can come up with a definition of what human milk is, whether it's a food or a tissue, then we can then move forward on coverage and the standards. I think this is kind of like my last slide, which I'm leaving a lot of time for questions. But I think that my main tenet and my main comment is that on this landscape, that all the players should be focused on the safety and accessibility, basically infant health and development, that the milk banking and the collection and distribution of milk, we should always focus on the infant and the recipient and the mothers and the families, that this is truly a gift of life for many, many infants, and to be able to, I'm very hopeful in the U.S. to say, yes, we have the babies covered in whatever way that we possibly can, and that we have a body that looks at the full landscape and who is getting it, is there equity, and are these babies being served? We know today that the cost savings is huge in this country. I mean, the numbers are incredible. If I'm not mistaken, it's something like $14 billion a year in healthcare costs. If we could, number one, get all moms to breastfeed, or at least become successful enough to breastfeed part of the time or all the time. And of course, the conversation will lead on to, work and labor and maternity leave and so forth. But really, this is part and parcel. The milk banking is part of the dialogue. Is that we want successful breastfeeders. We want to make sure that their infants are well attended to, and we have a really healthy new generation coming up in America. So I thank you. That is my slides. And if there are any questions I could respond to, I'd be glad to do that.
Right. Thank you, Pauline, for a fantastic presentation and so timely as we see more and more states are either working with hospitals or exploring how to advance policies to expand donor human milk access to meet the growing need. We know how much the need is growing. So yes, we do have some questions for you. I'd like to start off, Pauline, by saying that coalitions play such a key role in bringing together different stakeholders and partners. Are there any examples you can give of, state coalitions that have really helped in advancing donor milk access and advancing policies as well?
Oh, absolutely. We really, HMBANA really thrives on the coalitions. We work hand in hand. I can give you an example in California, since that's my area of expertise, so to speak. I've been here for 30 years. But coalitions have been fabulous in California. They have helped me tremendously in the various communities to put on milk drives and to help support the hospitals who have NICUs that really don't understand how to use donor milk or how to access it. The coalitions have been wonderful about providing access to that information to us, to the milk banks. I've also had individual situations where coalitions know of a very difficult situation with families, and they will call me directly and say, Pauline, we've got a family that is in dire need. Can you help us? And that helps me, and I'm sure it helps the rest of the executive directors in the U.S. because it pinpoints where we need to focus or where we need to do our work. A lot of times, because our marketing budgets are so small, we don't have that full board, essence of people knowing who we are, very similar to blood banking. When you see the Red Cross, you know what that means. When they see HMBANA, they're not quite sure what that means. And so we rely on the breastfeeding coalitions to help us get the word out that we're here to support your communities. So we've had coalitions put on, conferences where they've really been generous in allowing us to come speak about donor human milk banking. So we feel that we're truly in alliance with the coalitions and really, really support them and really need their help as well.
Great, thank you. And quite a few questions about, demand and supply as we are growing, as the demand is growing, as states seek legislation for the provision of donor human milk in the NICUs. Are the milk banks, how are milk banks preparing to fulfill this ever-growing need? And along the similar lines, what trends for requests for bank human milk versus availability in the milk bank?
Yes, definitely there is an increased need. We're feeling the tidal wave come across the U.S. and Canada. So how are we addressing it? We've got more sites. We've got more milk banks. We're strategically looking for areas to put more milk banks where the need is greatest. I think one of the things infrastructure-wise that HMBANA is doing is that we're beginning to, in lieu of the independence, and we all cherish our independent milk banks and the way we operate, but we're beginning to have the sisterhood, if you will, where we will transport the milk where it is needed as well. So we're all on guard. For example, like in California, we're really concerned about the Oroville Dam, and if the water swells to high levels, right, we may be losing a couple of NICUs because they're right smack in the middle of it. So in situations like that or hurricanes, HMBANA is really getting better equipped at responding to that. I think, the basic tenet, though, Kenny, is that we can't do our job unless we find those mothers. We simply cannot get the milk, from anyone but mothers. When I travel and talk to neonatologists, and they're demanding milk like formula, I keep reminding them that the donor milk that I get, they're not from cows in the field grazing. These are women, and we want them to be successful in breastfeeding their own children and supporting the needs of their own children first. And anything in excess that they have, we appreciate their donation. But we can't do it. We can't supply it unless we find the moms. That's why it's so important for us to make the wise alliances with the coalitions and with the Leche League and with the informed sharing groups, in that when the demand, not when, it is going to increase, and HMBANA needs to address that and be able to find those moms. HMBANA milk banks are nonprofits. We are not going to stockpile milk just because we want the milk or that we want to make more money. That is not our intent. HMBANA banks are a service. So if we have the milk, it goes out. And just the same, for example, when Haiti, and USBC remembers this, because I was at the USBC meeting, when Haiti hit, you know, the question was, Pauline, does HMBANA have the milk outside of the U.S.? And we were able to muster up enough milk to send to Haiti on a naval ship. We had to figure that out. That was the first time HMBANA ever responded in that way. And we've learned our lesson. You know, and so we've got the standards right now to do that. But again, we can't do our work unless we find the moms. And we need everybody's help to do that.
Thanks, Pauline. And I remember Haiti and the galvanizing around it very well. And in that way, do you have fact sheets to we have a few questions about how should local milk banks be doing some promo and outreach to mothers, and also we have a question about, are there fact sheets to share with mothers who might be interested in donating?
Yes. Sure, Kinkini. So each individual milk bank has their own kind of fact sheets and brochures and whatnot. I would highly recommend those that are on this call to contact the milk bank closest to your geographic area. And they will be more than happy to give you all their marketing tools so that you can get the word out. I think I failed to mention as well that in California that the WIC offices are been tremendous as well in helping us get the donors. And surprisingly enough, you know, the studies have shown that if donor milk is used in a specific hospital, then the breastfeeding rates increase. I suspect in the areas of low breastfeeding rates, you know, if the word gets out that their babies in their local area need milk, the breastfeeding rates will rise. That is the American spirit, and I believe in that, and I think it's something that we could use to our benefit.
Absolutely. And like you said, even if you don't have a milk bank in your city or state, don't think that that doesn't work. The nearest milk bank does, you know, provides to babies infants in your state. So they work across state lines to supply to the nearest hospitals to them, right, Pauline? So
yes.
And we have 26 HMBANA milk banks, but they stretch far and wide. Their service areas go much wider than their immediate local catchment areas. So and so work with local coalitions as well. Again, WIC and local coalitions are great partners in getting the word out and reaching moms and to those. Could HMBANA do a PSA on the need for milk donors? We have a question from Vlad. Another question which says that, do baby-friendly facilities only use milk from HMBANA milk banks?
Oh, baby-friendly. You know, I would probably, I can't answer that, but I would guess that if they have a NICU, they are well aware of donor milk. And to some extent, I suspect they're probably using some of the manufactured milk-based products for their most vulnerable, the smallest infants. They'll use it they'll use it with donor milk. So I think that, yes, the baby-friendly indicator is to be baby-friendly, and is a really high priority for us, for HMBANA banks, to provide donor milk. And I think the other thing that we're beginning to see, at least in the last year and a half, that JACO has been very instrumental in determining whether donor milk is being used in the hospitals because of their standard of breastfeeding rates. We're beginning to see hospitals order donor milk for that. So, to some extent, I think the stars are aligning. There are many, many questions and ethical issues we need to answer, but the stars are aligning. And we need to answer these because, like I say, the tsunami is coming, and we need to be ready for it.
Absolutely. We have time for 2-3 more questions. One question says, as state health and public health departments have emerged as important stakeholders in efforts to support breastfeeding employees and their employers, is this happening with donor milk as well? How are, state entities advancing policies?
Yes, I can't speak to all the states. I think, for example, Texas, their public health department has been just amazing in standardizing milk banking in their state. And in California, for example, the State Department of Health has been very instrumental in supporting the use of donor milk in hospitals, tissue banking requirements, and standardization. Every day I get messages, excuse me, from different states who want to put in more statutes and laws about milk banking. So it's coming to fruition. I think the State Department of Health, it's kind of knocking on their doors that this is something that we need to address in all the states. It is very uneven right now. So that in fact, that if a mother wanted milk and she lived, let's say, in a state, California, that doesn't have a milk bank, that there are no laws in regards to safety of human milk. But if she called California, we have high standards. We're beholden to high standards by the State Department of Health to process the milk at that level. So it's yes, the State Department of Health. It's huge, and we're beginning to see each state by state come up with standards. New Jersey, I just saw New Mexico yesterday, so that there's a possibility of statutes coming up and laws. So yes, definitely.
Right, and as you said, as all states don't have equal support for breastfeeding or donor milk, it is urgent that state entities do more to make safe, human donor milk available and accessible. And Becky Manal also says that, also note that HMBANA milk banks work closely and help each other out if one is experiencing a shortage. The Oklahoma Mother's Milk Bank has sent milk to several other state banks when needed. So there's that synergy, that synergistic relationship in how these milk banks are working with each other to deal with the growing need.
Correct. Becky is just phenomenal. I've been to her milk bank in Oklahoma City. We share a lot of things, but I had the great opportunity to visit Becky's milk bank, and they are truly amazing. Where certain areas have prolific amounts of milk, and And there are other areas where they use a lot of milk but can't find the milk. So it's really been a labor of love, and we really appreciate that. We again, it's like a sisterhood. And you know, when we get the first man as executive director, we won't call it a sisterhood anymore. But it's truly our focus is on the babies and service to the communities.
Absolutely. There are some more questions here that we don't have time for in this session, but we'll be carrying to the other session as well. We have Mary Galvin, who says that she was a mom who donated milk during the Haiti crisis. So thank you, Mary. That's fantastic to hear. So with that, we are on time, and thank you again, Pauline, for that great discussion. Some of the questions, would you be willing to answer some of these questions that have come up, and maybe we can post the replies in our website pages if they are?
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you. And so we invite you, if you're not already registered, to participate in the breakout discussion session that's starting right now. You have the registration link in your chat box, and please come share lessons learned and insights with us. That's very, very helpful for us to keep this conversation going. And as always, connect with us in all the different ways. Be sure to be part of our learning communities and the Coalition Learning Connection, and subscribe to Wednesday Weekly Wire and Action Alerts as well. And as Pauline said, the work we do is all about partnerships, coordination, and collaboration. It's truly amazing what we can accomplish together to impact the landscape of breastfeeding support. So thank you for all you do, and we hope very much that the 222 webinars bring you ideas for collective and collaborative action. So please fill out your evaluation forms. We read them, we hear, take your suggestions for topics and speakers, and bring you topics and sessions that you really, really want. So thank you all again, and until next time, goodbye.